Welcome back to No Fear Public Speaking. It's your instructor, Abraham Lavoie, and in this session, we're going to work on the nuts and bolts of creating our outline or our speaking notes. So I'm going to do it first in Microsoft Word and then next in Google Docs. So if you have Word, this is how I set up my notes. A new document, of course, but then under Page Setup, I do a landscape orientation so that it's a letter-sized sheet of paper, but it's wide, and then divided into two columns. This is so that when you print these notes out, you can cut it in half down the middle, and it'll be two half sheets of paper, and then you can paste that into one side and the other of your notebook or your journal or your book, and take that to the stage and use them for your notes. So I generally set up my notes in this way, and you'll see I put the title, the date at the top in larger font and in bold so that I can see right at the top what particular talk this is all about. And then I'll begin to make my notes. Now, it's very critical that you understand that we are not using manuscript type of notes. These are notes in outline form. So we're going to put very basic reminder phrases, or I like to call them trigger phrases, that will enable me to glance down at my notes, see a trigger that will be a phrase or a word or a sentence that will trigger a thought in my mind of what I'm going to say. And then for each of those points, I'm going to talk for 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes. It will vary depending on the actual point that you're making. But in this case, you'll notice that I've put introduction, and then I've put a few points underneath there. Tell the first introductory story. So I may, instead of putting that in my actual notes, I may put tell story of Tomas Delgado, which is an introductory story I used in one of my talks. So I'm going to make sure that I know that story internally. I've read it somewhere, whether it be in the news or in a book or heard somebody speak about it. I'm going to make sure I know enough of the details of that story that I can tell it without reading it off of a manuscript. So all I need is tell story of Tomas Delgado. And that's going to be the only thing that I need to glance at my notes about, and then I'm going to tell that story. And then I'm going to maybe use some kind of a reminder on how that story relates to the talk that I'm going to give. And then, very critical in the introduction, is to state my objective statement. Whatever I decided I was going to be the objective of this talk, I'm going to state that in the introduction. So I'm connecting the story that I told with the actual topic of what I'm going to speak about. Then I'm going to continue on. And again, these are just sample reminders, but this might be a good template. I'll make this available in the downloadable section where you can download this and then use these notes. Example, point one, make point one, explain point one, give an example of point one, and then connect point one to the objective statement. Well, you're not going to use those. You're going to replace these with your own points and the way that you want to explain that point in light of the context of your audience that you're speaking to. You're going to maybe put an example somehow of how that point makes sense, and then you're going to put a sentence or a phrase that connects that point to the objective that you're making. So all of these are sample, but I wanted you to see this on the screen. And again, for me to emphasize that we are not memorizing a speech. We're not reading a manuscript. We are creating trigger phrases, trigger sentences, points in an outline form that will trigger our thoughts, our remembrance, our memory on things that we're going to say. But again, we're not memorizing those things. We're just knowing those stories, those points good enough that they will come out of our mouth extemporaneously. We'll be able to talk extemporaneously about our subject. For each point or each of these phrases, you may speak 30 seconds, you may speak 2 minutes, and it'll vary. But you're putting these stories, you're putting these examples in your own words. And in the next session on rehearsing your talk, this is where you're really going to perfect this. And you're going to maybe add some things into this by hand or on the computer and then print it out again. But the point here is we're making an outline. We are making sure that the things that we're putting in that outline trigger the memory of what we're going to say on a particular subject or point. So here's the outline, and you can just simply take this. As I said, I'll make sure it's in the downloads area where you can download it and use it as a template. Of course, you'll want to save it. Now, also, I'm going to give you the kind of an overview of how we do this in Google Docs. It's really the same process where you're going to start with a blank document and make sure it's set up in landscape mode. So that'll be done under page setup. And then your margins, I usually shrink them down just a little bit to make there room for more on a page. You also want to make sure that your font is large enough so that you can see it from 12 or 18 inches away when you're holding your journal or your book or your notebook into which you've pasted your notes. You want to be able to see it. And of course, 2 columns, which you'll see up above the actual page. There are a little gray area right in the middle of that ruler, and that indicates that you have the white area is the column, the gray area in the very middle is the gutter between the 2 columns. So once again, we're going to set it up with title, date, the event, the place, and then I'm just going to paste in from my Word document these other points that we already typed out. So again, we're creating an outline here. We're not creating a manuscript. We are making points that and you don't have to have all these points good enough in your memory at this point. What you're trying to do here, and you'll get better at this as you do this more frequently, but you'll say, I've got this story and this is what I know I need on the stage to remind me how to make this point or tell this story. So it'll be a bit of a trial and error, but here's the good thing. You can create this now, and then in a subsequent session when we talk about rehearsing, you're going to see, oh, I didn't put nearly enough detail here, so I've got to add another phrase or two to clarify what I'm saying. Or I know this story well enough that I don't need all this detail. I can just tell this story. So this then is the Google Doc format for creating your notes. And once again, this is probably too small to see it from a stage and without getting it real close to your eyes. So we jacked up the font size just a little bit to make sure that we're going to be able to see it. I also like to begin a point on the beginning of the page. In other words, I don't like to have point 2 carry through from one column to the next, and that's why you'll see point 3 is kind of further down, because I wanted to make sure that it started at the top of the page. Then, of course, you'll click in title and save it according to the title that you'd like, and that'll then be saved in your Google Docs.